What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So the Stanley Cup playoffs are now fully underway, and it kind of got me thinking, what non-playoff teams are the most likely to be in the Stanley Cup playoffs next year? Because every single year, like 3 to 4 teams go out, go in. It's not utter madness, but we're going to have new playoff teams in next year, and not to look ahead before free agency in the offseason, but I thought right now, based on what I thought, we'd go through it 16-1. You could probably assume the teams like the bottom 4, but there's a bunch of potential teams that are going to be battling for playoff spots next year. And I think with the Islanders, Capitals in the East, they have a decent chance of falling off. Nashville maybe in the West, even LA I could see maybe falling out of a spot. Vegas if they if they age next year as well. So there's going to be some open spots next year. Let's get into it. Starting at 16, I have the San Jose Sharks. Not a surprise here. I don't think they're going to be as bad as this year. I think they're going to crack the 50-point mark. I know that's saying something. They still have some young pieces that are going to be better next year, like a Fabian Zetterlund, a William Eklund. They did lose a hurdle, but besides that, they should be a better team next year. Granlund leading the charge. Next up, Chicago, also basically no chance in hell. Similarly to San Jose, I think that they should be aiming for like mid-60s. They definitely still want another top 5 pick, but the last 2 years probably were like the utter bottoming out. Last year, obviously trading Kane, trading Domi. This year, just a bunch of veterans and Bedard, not much. They're going to have more young talent. They should be expected to take a step forward this year. I'd be shocked if they cracked the 75-point mark, but I think like 65 is very possible for the San Jose Sharks. Anaheim Ducks still doesn't really seem like it's quite their time. If they get a Macklin Celebrini, I could definitely jump them, but if they only get a guy that's not going to be on the team for another year or two, even with Gauthier coming up next season, they're still probably a year or two away. I really like their young core. I don't think that they should rush it. We look at what happened last offseason. They kind of rushed. I don't think they were expected to make the playoffs, but the Killorn, the Gudas deal is actually looking very good. He's fantastic defensively. But the Killorn deal, if I'm Pat Verbeek, I'm not going that aggressive this offseason. I think probably the season after. Once you get a full year of Carlson, he had some injuries this year, Gauthier, McTavish, Zegras healthy, you really see what you have in this young forward core. I think it's something special. Then next 2025 offseason, then you really strike. Next up at 13th, the Columbus Blue Jackets. I think that they are a step up from the Anaheim Ducks, just because they're a little bit more older, a little bit more veteran experience with guys like a Boone Jenner, like Zach Werenski, a Johnny Gaudreau. But this team has a good future, and it's going to be very interesting to see who they hire in terms of a general manager and what that general manager does. That's massive to this potential list. If he goes balls to the wall all in, I think Columbus can potentially compete at a high level next season, but we said that potentially after last offseason. I was still low on that, but last offseason they go out, they get Severson, they get Provorov. The previous offseason they get Gaudreau. They just seem like a cursed franchise, and as a result, I got to have them pretty low at number 13. Number 12, Calgary Flames. I think it's going to be a tough season next year for them. What am I saying? Trading so many goddamn pieces. And although they got decent roster players back for Lindholm getting Kuzmenko, for Toffoli getting Sharangovich, the team is objectively going to be pretty bad next season, and rightfully so. They need to go through maybe not a nuclear rebuild. I don't know if ownership's going to get behind that like a San Jose or Chicago, but they need to be a bottom 8 team, get some high picks the next couple years, unless Zari, Pospisil, Coronado, unless they absolutely take a giant step. I don't really see this team competing at that high of a level, and I don't think I'm slighting Calgary Flames fans when I say that. At number 11, I have the Montreal Canadiens. When looking at the Canadiens, they're probably similarly to the Anaheim Ducks. Not next year, although next year I think they should be more competitive than the Ducks. Next year I'm expecting 80 to 85 points. It's probably this season after where they're going to be a highly, highly competitive team. When looking at it, you still got next season, you got a full season of Lane Hudson. Maybe David Reinbacher plays a lot of NHL games. They're not quite yet ready to take that next step, especially with how competitive the Atlantic Division is looking. But their future is very bright, but not next season. Number 10. Arizona Coyotes, or no, Utah HC. Utah HC I have here. I think that they could potentially be a really interesting team. It depends what they do in free agency. They have $48 million to spend. Will free agents buy into the idea of moving to a relocated city, a city that has obstructed views? It's going to be very interesting. But if they spend, I see no reason why a core of Keller, Schmaltz, Michelli, Cooley, Gunther's been great this year. If they take another step, as well as maybe bring in some veteran defensemen to help out Dursey and Valimaki with that very solid goalie tandem, I see no reason why they can't potentially battle in the East. I'd say there's like 25-30% chance that they could be in the playoffs. They're a legit threat. Just far too much uncertainty right now in terms of what the team will look like. But I'm decently high on them for the Arizona Coyotes. St. Louis Blues at number 9. It's going to be tough. Although they were the closest team in the Western Conference this season, they got such fantastic goaltending by Jordan Binnington as well as Joel Hofer. I think that's going to be tough to replicate next year. I think they're going to have a bit of a down year, as well as the fact that they might trade Pavel Buchnevich at some point. They're not really... they're not, obviously they would like to make the playoffs, but I feel like that's not really their objective. They're in this retool, so I can't have them that high. I don't think they're going to be making massive win now moves this offseason. At number 8, Philadelphia Flyers, a little bit lower on them, but based on how they crapped out in the final third of the season, I think it's justified. They got a solid core, a lot of guys between the ages of like 23, 27. Mitchkov's obviously not coming over next season, so in looking at it, I think they're in store for another 85, maybe 90-point season. They're just a very average team. I don't think that that's really a slight. They started off so hot this season, but I think they are more so the back half team that we saw last year. And a full season of are we going to trust Ursin and Fedotov? It's going to be very interesting with no Carter Hart, obviously. So, stop saying obviously. But when looking at Philly, I think they're in store for a pretty mediocre season. Number 7, Seattle Kraken. I have the Kraken here. Down year after last year having 100 points. This year going to finish, I think, with like 85. I'm kind of lukewarm on this team. When looking at it, the number one concern I had with this team was goaltending, but Joey Daccord had really stepped up this season. So I think that if they can get some internal growth, if Matty Beniers can bounce back, if Shane Wright can be a legit NHLer next season, I could see them battling for a wild card spot again. I think that they're not as bad as they were this year. I think they're going to have a bounce back season, and they re-signed Jordan Eberle instead of trading him at the deadline. So it appears like Ron Francis wants to maybe not be extremely aggressive, but he wants to win with this core. They're not in a retool mode yet. I mean, they've been around for like 4 goddamn seasons. I hope they're not. So I think Seattle has an okay shot at making the Stanley Cup playoffs. Ottawa at number 6. I'm not going to have the full-fledged belief that I had in them last offseason. I need to see them do something with that goaltending. I still think that they have a lot of talent with their forward core. Losing Josh Norris stinks. I don't even know if he's going to play next year, as well as Chychrun. There's a lot to be done this offseason in terms of potentially moving Chychrun, as well as doing something with the goaltender position that I can't have them that high, but I still am decently high on them considering Shane Pinto has looked great. Ridley Gregg's a very young, intriguing guy, as well as Tim Stützle maybe finally takes that superstar step. So Ottawa will have a chance if they can get good goaltending. I would, if I knew that they could get 905 goaltending, I might have them like top 3 on this list, honestly, but the goaltending was so atrocious this year, and there's no clear fix considering Korpisalo was signed long-term that I can't have them that high. Number 5, Pittsburgh Penguins. They're going to be competitive. I can't see them like fully entering a retool rebuild quite yet. I think they're going to go at it for another year or 2 while they have some of their guys playing still at a high level. Not the most inspiring team, but they're very high floor, low ceiling kind of team. I know that they're going to be in store for another high 80, low 90 point season. Can they make the playoffs? Potentially. It is what it is. They're pretty mediocre. Detroit at number 4. You look at it this year, just barely missed the playoffs. It's going to be interesting how they bring back Kane. They have a lot of guys on 1-year deals. Got this Bear Sprong. They have a very busy offseason ahead. How does Edvinsson look in his first season? Does Nate Danielson, Marco Kasper play next year? Because when looking at the Red Wings, yes, they do have a very good prospect pool in terms of guys under the age of 25. At the NHL level last year, it was really only Seider and Raymond. I still got to see how the Yzerman picks pan out next season in the NHL. Some of them will be getting more serious NHL roles, so I can't have them too high. The goaltending still kind of scares me. Lyon didn't play good down the stretch. Husso is a horrible contract at this point. So I'm going to have Detroit at number 4. Similarly, they have a decently high ceiling, but at this point, I think that their floor is around high 80s, low 90s. They're going to be at least definitely in the mix. And number 3, this might surprise people, but I'm going to go with the Buffalo Sabres. When looking at the Buffalo Sabres, one of my main concerns with them was goaltending, and it wasn't even Devin Levi that stepped up. It was UPL that played fantastic. I think that they're the team that, among teams that might be battling for a playoff spot, not talking about like the Anaheim Ducks or Chicago, that is going to probably have the most internal growth this season. You look at it, 18-year-old Zach Benson's going to take a step. Peterka might take another step. Jack Quinn has looked very good. Owen Power had a bit of a down sophomore season. I think he's going to be better. They are just such an intriguing, young, under 25 team that I think next year, if they can put it together under a new coach, I was not the biggest fan of Don Granato. So if they can bring in the right coach, I see absolutely no reason why this team can't be a playoff team. A big down year last year, but we forget 2 years ago or last year, They missed the playoffs by 2 points. I'm pretty high on Buffalo. I'm more high on Buffalo than the Ottawa Senators. Next up, Minnesota. Yes, they are in a little bit of a tough cap situation with all that dead cap, but I still think that they have more talent than, say, a Nashville Predators. If they can, I don't know. I think they're going to, yeah, I think John Hines is. But even under John Hines, they were a far better team. They were almost a playoff quality team. They just got off to such a bad start. I am concerned that they re-signed Marc-Andre Fleury for $2.5 million. Not a fan of that. He did not play that good this season, and he's just old as hell. If they can get solid goaltending, although they don't have a ton of money, I think they do have a decent amount of depth. Defensively, you got a very solid top three of Faber, Brodin, Spurgeon. Spurgeon missed all of this season. People forget that. As well as the forward core, guys like Rossi, Boldy, blanking, but there's plenty of other guys that are young on that team that will take more steps. They just got the Russian guy that came over, Liam Ogren, made his NHL debut. He should be with the team next season. They're going to have more growth in terms of this. I think last year was a down year. This team consistently made the playoffs the prior 3 seasons. I think there's a decent chance that they're back next year. And then lastly, not a surprise, but I had the New Jersey Devils as the most likely non-playoff team this year to make it next year. Similarly to the Ottawa Senators, it comes down to goaltending. They're far better, obviously, 5-on-5 than the Ottawa Senators. But if they can get good goaltending, they should probably cruise to a playoff spot. Their underlying numbers were still very solid this season without Dougie Hamilton for basically the entire season, as well as Simone Nemec, Luke Hughes, Alexander Holtz. Hopefully Dawson Mercer takes another step. All those guys are still pretty young. They're in a very good cap situation outside of maybe the Palat contract. I expect New Jersey to make a wild card spot at the bare minimum, probably the third Metro at the bare minimum, over the New York Islanders or the Washington Capitals. But yeah, here's the list: San Jose, Chicago, Anaheim, Columbus, Calgary, Montreal, Utah, St. Louis, Philly, Seattle, Ottawa, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Buffalo, Minnesota, New Jersey. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Which of these teams do you think is far too high? Which ones are far too low? What would you move around? And I'll be seeing the next one.